All right, let me pause the alerts. Let's talk about this situation here. It's going to be a quite loaded time. So let's do this. Let's get into it. I appreciate anybody stopping by, regardless of whether you agree with me or not. Okay. So first and foremost, let's just talk about how TikTok is not exactly the best place to exchange these types of ideas. It's a very nuanced type situation. I'm going to go through it, and we're doing it on here specifically because really TikTok kind of just exists as a place for everybody to put out 1 minute gotcha clips for everything. It really focuses more on people trying to trump the other person rather than actually having an honest conversation. It's shitty dialogue. It's not productive at all. So let's actually really just start with the video that started it all, that really riled up tensions. And here is going to be the video, because I think that some people are, I guess we could say, misinformed on my perspective. A lot of people reacted emotionally, and I want to be honest with you, just because you react emotionally doesn't invalidate your reaction. But I think that you guys are assigning a value to my words that simply doesn't exist. So we're going to listen to my words, and I'm going to recontextualize those so that we can move forward from there. Okay? The topic deals with. So this is somebody asking me about the situation. Was this yesterday? So it's very sensitive. But to my understanding, this is what happened. This guy and four other people took advantage of the kindness of Todd and Stacy Bagley, robbed them, drove around, tried pawning off jewelry, then shot them and left them in the trunk of their car, and then lit the car on fire. People are saying, oh, well, he was reformed. I don't care. I really don't care. I don't care about the Reformation. He was 18 when it happened. The other guy, who was 19 when it happened, was put to death last month. The other three who were not 18 are facing some other charges. They're not facing the death penalty. But, we're so concerned about the life of a person who murdered two people. I really don't care if he pulled the trigger or not. He was right there when it happened. We're so concerned with the death of a murderer, but we're not very concerned about the death of two honestly God-fearing people. I mean, they were youth ministers, for God's sake. Why is this even a story? Honestly, who cares? So let's establish well, first and foremost, I think the thing to properly contextualize. When I say I don't care about reform, I don't care about the reform in this particular situation, okay? I do believe that the criminal justice system, or rather prison, really should exist to reform people, right? But I also think that there are people who are beyond reform or beyond reformation. And those are people who are murderers or complicit to murder. That's honestly the way I feel, right? I don't really necessarily care about the potential reform of this individual. It's very easy to say, well, he was reformed when he was in solitary confinement. Who's to say that? What is the Reformation for? What is it going to lead to? Can we release somebody like this? No, I don't think we ever could. So the reform is generally irrelevant. Somebody being reformed because they're getting watched 24/7 is not exactly something that I'm living by. But that's honestly my perception on that. But overall, totally for prison reform. Recidivism rate is way too high. Almost 80% of people who go to jail return to jail in the next 5 years. It's insane. So, the next point here, what I want to tell you guys, whether you want to believe this or not, is that we're a lot closer in our perspective than a lot of you want to believe, right? When we look at this situation, people are like, oh, you're a really bad person, Papa. But what you need to understand is that when we put this on a spectrum, we put this on a spectrum of innocent to death penalty, right? So innocent, here's we'll say innocent is here, death penalty is here. That's the spectrum. Most of you, well, say you're not, but most of you are saying that you're arguing that he should be in prison for life, right? So we're very close in our perspectives. I would hope none of you think that he's actually innocent enough to be let go. I wanted to bring that up because a lot of people think that this is like a life or death type of a situation. And I don't mean that in the serious way, more as a metaphor. But this isn't something where we're completely divided on. We're very close in our perceptions of this typical situation. Now, back to what I was actually saying in this video. What I was saying is I don't really care that he was put to death. I know that's a harsh take. I know that upsets a lot of you guys. But from my perspective, and you need to understand this, is it's not that I'm lacking empathy for Brandon Bernard, right? What it is that I am more focused on the two people who were murdered rather than I'm more focused on being empathetic towards the two people that were murdered rather than the person that it was a compliant to the murder. Okay? Now that's that's where a lot of people, from my perspective, come. You think that I'm just being so rude to this guy, but it's awful. I put myself in those shoes of having my kids or my parents killed, and I don't know exactly how much empathy you would like me to have for this individual who was compliant, right? And we'll get into the specifics as we move on. But that's where I come from. And I think that, like, to me, there feels like a very like fundamental lack of empathy for the people who were murdered rather than for the person who was complicit in the murder. Okay? Right? So, here's the biggest thing that I have an issue with when it comes to this situation. Okay? The very, very, very heavy mainstream narrative isn't a narrative of rationale. Okay? None of you, not a single person who duetted my video, not a single person who's been on TikTok crying, and I mean that literally crying, like a luring skull, actually crying. Not a single person said, listen, I don't believe in capital punishment, and I think what he did was disgusting and he deserves prison forever. Nobody said that. A lot of you are going to pivot back to that when you're challenged, but none of you are actually saying that, right? And this is the biggest problem. A lot of people are glorifying this. There are so many different situations where he's seen people are just not saying that. Because if you were against capital punishment, where were you with the one guy who abused his 2-year-old daughter and killed her? Nobody cared about that. He was put to death this year as well. Nobody cares. Okay? Nobody really gives a shit about that. And that's kind of the problem. And if I did say, like, hey, do you think that person should have been killed? A lot of you would have stayed silent like you did because you're ambivalent to it. Yeah, maybe you think that capital punishment shouldn't be a thing, but you didn't stick up for that situation, right? Because really, when it comes down to it, a lot of people's rhetoric has been very much in defense of this person and putting down the atrocity that was committed against Stacey and Todd Bagley. And that's where I take a big issue with. It's frustrating when every single bit of language is diminishing to like the atrocity that was committed. That's the problem. And that's where I come from. Okay? And let's go through the chain of events here. Okay? Let me go through the chain of events of like what happened. Okay? Todd and Stacey were captured and tortured for 9 hours before they were shot dead and lit on fire. That's what happened. Okay? And to go on further, I guarantee you that there are people in this chat and watching this video that sat back and said, when were they tortured? And I'm going to tell you that is right there. That's an example of you downplaying it. If you don't think that being held captive for 9 hours under immense emotional and mental stress isn't torture, I'm telling you, this is the first instance where you should try to recognize that you're downplaying the atrocity that was committed. And like, this is the problem that we have. This is my problem. This is a problem with people that are aligning with what I'm saying. This is the problem we're having. There's so much rhetoric focused on diminishing the situation of a murder of 2 people. Their kindness was taken advantage of. Do you understand? Their kindness. They were trying to help people get home. That was the pretense that they were under. Yeah. That's the first instance, okay? And that's the biggest thing, I think, really. So let's go through the chain of events specifically. We're going to move on to all these different things. I have the Supreme Court of the United States. I have Bernard versus the United States, right? So this is from Bernard's defense, okay? And we're going to go through it piece by piece. And I'm going to explain to you because a lot of people are like, oh, you've been pushing misinformation. I haven't been. I'm going to explain to you how a lot of you guys, honestly, have been pushing a bit of misinformation yourselves, okay? We're going to go through this. This might be upsetting to a lot of you, but I hope that you sit back for a second and you try to actually digest what I'm saying instead of reacting instantly because of the thing that you might think happened, okay? So the first argument that we're met with is he was forced to do it, right? People keep saying, well, there was a gun to his head. He was forced to do it. I want you to understand something again. There's no way to contest that because the people who could contest that are dead. You understand? He can say whatever he wants. Any of the gang members that he was involved with can say whatever they want. And there's literally no way to contest it because Todd and Stacey are dead. And you want to push this as an absolute fact that he was forced to do this, when literally you're just giving him far too much of the benefit of the doubt. How am I supposed to say, yeah, he's probably innocent, when 2 people are dead because of him. He is definitely he is an actor in this. He's an agent in this situation. How am I supposed to say, like, yeah, you know what, that's probably what happened? No. How am I supposed to say that? The people that could have contested that were murdered. There's nothing that you could do, right? That's incredible to me. That's incredibly disrespectful to the entire situation. Second of all, excuse me, the smoke and this is almost like it's such a weird argument. People are having these conversations about smoke inhalation versus the medical death examination, and like, I want you to understand this again. This is just more diminishing language, right? So when there was an autopsy done, right, I suppose the state came to the conclusion that Stacy had died to smoke inhalation, right? And then an independent autopsy said, well, she actually died. It was a medical death. She was medically dead before the fire was even lit, right? The problem is, and if you look at this, these two things do conflict, kind of. Okay. I would ask you, if this was a pure medical death, then why was there soot inside the throat of Stacy, right? And how do we know that being lit on fire and inhaling that smoke didn't lead to her being medically dead? The reality is that, yeah, she was going to die regardless, but again, she was lit on fire. The both of them were. The point I'm trying to make is this is more diminishing language to try to make Brandon Bernard look good, and it just diminishes the situation. It diminishes the murder. It's just more diminishing language, and it's just more favorability towards somebody who can say whatever they want, but there's just literally nothing that these two can say to their credit because they're dead. Now, a lot of people talk about the withholding of evidence, right? Which is a totally big deal. Absolutely big deal, right? So I'm going to see if I can grab this really quick. If you look through this article, and I would urge you to do so, if you look through this, you could I'll just put it in the chat if you'd like. Here you go. I'm going to put that in the chat. Okay. But as you look through this, basically, I'll give you the rundown. But the state argued that what was going to happen was he was going to be put in jail, and then there was going to be some kind of a rite of passage in order to him to go through his initiation of having to kill somebody once they were in that jail. The information that was withheld was a professional who had said that for this particular gang, there was some kind of a pyramid structure. Right? Now, I would argue that those two things don't necessarily conflict. Is it still an issue? Absolutely. He definitely should have been able to use that as a defense, for sure. But let me remind you again that this is somebody that was compliant in a murder. Okay? But the reason that I bring this up for more than anything else is because people are saying that based off of this situation, that 5 of the 9 jurors who actually sentenced him to death for the death penalty flipped their perspectives. And I'm letting you know that that is not something that's actually said at all. That's the mainstream narrative. But this is the document in defense of Brandon Bernard. And it doesn't even say that. This is the official Supreme Court document. And I'm going to find this really quick, and I'm going to read exactly what it says so that you can understand what I'm saying here. Let's see. You're going to have to just give me a second. All right, so here it is. So I'm going to read to you the exact language. And again, I'm going to make sure you understand that this document is in defense of Bernard, right? That's like what they presented to the United States, to Texas. Well, the United States, yeah, sure. Right, this was federal. Excuse me for misspeaking before. This is what people have been saying is that 5 of the 9 jurors flipped their perspectives on this case. When what it actually says is 5 of the 9 jurors at Bernard's trial now either support or do not oppose a clemency. I'm going to explain to you why those are 2 drastically different things. Okay. First and foremost, like I said, this document is supposed to be as favorable towards Brandon as possible, Brandon Bernard as possible, which means that this language, 5 of the 9 jurors at Bernard's trial now either support or do not oppose a clemency, is flavorful language that suggests that most of them actually do oppose a clemency, when then the reality is that most of them don't. I believe that there was like one named person who actually flipped the script on what they thought and said he deserves clemency. Now, what does that mean? That means that if, and we're all being speculatory, right? People are speculating, well, if this had come out originally, then Bernard would have never gotten the death sentence in the first place. What I would argue is that because most of them are ambivalent, not opposing clemency means you don't care. Because most of them are not opposing to clemency, they're ambivalent. I would argue that if 20 years ago, even if this evidence was brought up, it probably wouldn't have changed very much other than potentially one vote. Right? So that's still, what, 8-4? Now, maybe you agree with that, maybe you disagree. That's fine, but you have to understand that the framing of the language that was used in a lot of these mainstream media outlets is not held up specifically by this. It's not. Okay? It really isn't. It's a tough take, I understand. But I would argue that he probably still would have gotten the death penalty. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe I'm wrong. But again, this is all very speculation. This is all very much speculation that we're doing here. Right? Now, when it comes to the prosecutor who had gone through this, saying that he doesn't think, or he or she, excuse me, I don't know, I think it might have been a she, I'm not entirely sure. But that individual had come out and said, like, I don't believe that they should get the death penalty because look at all the reform and the progress. And again, I'm going to bring it back to it. I understand. That's very nice. Like I said before, though, when it comes to murder, I'm not exactly very lenient on reform. There are people that can be reformed. I think that just in general, when it comes to murdering somebody, or honestly, abuse or assault, or let's just go as far as to say as rape, especially of children, is something that death penalty, I don't care. Like, absolutely fine with it. Maybe you don't agree. That's fine. Maybe you're not for the death penalty, but I don't think that that's something that any of you would go like, oh, bad take. Maybe in this situation, you would say, oh, I don't think it applies here. If that's fine. But generally speaking, I don't know that you may disagree, but I don't think that you would fault me as an individual. I don't think you'd be like, yeah, oh, that's a terrible take. No, you'd probably be like, okay, I understand. Maybe you just think that we need a more empathetic worldview. That's totally fine. It's a minor contention to the overall ideal of what we think that society should be. But this reform that he went through when he was under lock and key, I believe he was in confinement, solitary. That's what they do to death row inmates. What else do you think would happen? I don't know. Like, you know, we're putting him in a scenario where he basically has to reform in some capacity, and then we're praising him for that reform. I don't, you know what I mean? I don't know what to tell you. Maybe in this situation, he should have gotten clemency. You might be right. I'm not advocating. I'm not happy he's gone. Simply put, it's not something that moves me. I'm not moved by it, especially due to the framing. Like I said, to bring it back to the beginning, okay? Nobody's narrative was, listen, he did a terrible thing, but I'm against the death penalty. No, you guys, they waited. This is what really gets me too. It was, you know, Kim Kardashian waited to find someone that she considered palatable, and she tried to equate this person to like the young woman who killed their abuser. It was like a pimp or something. Totally fine with that. She should have killed him. I don't care. But like, you can't equate these two. This is not that situation. Okay. We want to have this conversation about victim of circumstances, right? And I know a lot of people said there's levels of systemic racism that are involved. Maybe. You might be right. But a lot of people are taking the general concept of systemic racism, which I'm going to say absolutely exists, and you're looking at one specific situation saying it has to exist here. But again, this was a young man who was part of a gang, and he was complicit in the murder and torture of two innocent people that were trying to help them get home. And when it comes to my empathy, I have none for this man. But I do have a lot with not only Stacy and Todd Bagley, but their families. If you disagree, that's fine. But like, let's not pretend that I'm a fundamentally bad person because I don't empathize with the person that you want to empathize with. Because if I was going to use your same shameful rhetoric, I could just sit here and say you're a terrible person for not caring about the deaths of Stacy and Todd. But I'm not going to weaponize death in the way that a lot of you guys are. This is a complicated situation with a lot of nuance to it. And a lot of you guys like to just run with this and go, "Oh, you're a terrible person." We're not that far off on our worldview here. And again, you're just not listening to what I had said. I don't know if you just came into here, whatever the hell your name is, Fatty Mizuki. I don't care what your name is, but like apparently you just got in and you didn't listen when I went through that specifically. 5 of the 9 jurors didn't change their minds. We went through this already. You can go look at the YouTube video. 5 of the 9 jurors either changed their mind or didn't care if they got clemency. That's different. And we went through a whole exercise that if this information that was withheld, which shouldn't have been, was originally proposed, that most likely he still would have gotten the same sentence. The language in this document is going to favor Brandon Bernard, as much as possible, because that's who the document is for. That's how this works. We live in that's one of the issues with our court system, is that both sides lie as much as possible to make themselves look as good as possible. Okay, and since they're trying to frame themselves in a way that makes it seem like 5 of the 9 jurors flipped, when the reality is only one that I've seen documented actually flipped, the other 4 are ambivalent about the flip, that means that 20 years ago, when everybody's tensions were riled up, because the situation of this is horrific. 9 hours of torture until an inevitable death and then lit on fire. Okay? That's what happened. When you have that fresh in your head and when you're seeing the families cry, I'm sure you're going to be much more inclined to give the death penalty to somebody that's definitely complicit in this murder. And that's what the situation is, okay? This probably would have stayed the same regardless. Maybe it wouldn't have. I think that always should have been brought up. It was terrible that they removed it. But like I said in the beginning, this isn't a situation where I would advocate for the death penalty. But it doesn't move me in the way it moves you guys, because you guys are more focused on being empathetic towards Brandon Bernard, somebody who is complicit in murder, whereas my empathy lies more with the victims, the innocent victims trying to do the right thing, who were punished for trying to do the right thing. And that's where I come from.